Good, good. And press on hold to record. Well, that's going to be an issue, isn't it? Well, good afternoon, first of all. We're here doing a live reading. Surprise! Yeah. It's was meant to be being done kind of outside, but that kind of the weather kind of put a stop to that. So we're now in a side room, little function room in a hotel in Bournemouth. We've got needs must, unfortunately, but when the sun hopefully reappears, we'll probably do something on the beach next time. Okay, so some of you, or hopefully all of you, may have seen that yesterday we celebrated our anniversary of the publication of Lust and Liberty. So I mean, wow, where did that time go? So today we're sort of doing a belated celebration of that by doing a bit of a live reading of. Okay, can only do so much of Instagram. That's not gonna. We're gonna have to forget about that. I'll just do it for you guys then. Live reading, and it's not going to come from Lust and Liberty because hopefully some of you have already read at least the first chapter of that. So I'm actually going to give you the first chapter, or at least some of it, of the upcoming sequel, Sin and Secrecy, which I have here. Now, what you're about to read is probably one of the oldest scenes in the entire Barrelford Scandals series, because it's kind of the first thing that I wrote. I mean, obviously it's been edited tons of times, but the scene as it is and what happens in the events, they are pretty much the same as what they were 10 years ago when I first wrote them. So yeah, now you're about to hear, you know, the oldest sort of events in the book series. So here it goes. This is chapter 1, which is called The Mistake with the Dictionary, and this is from Sin and Secrecy. Okay. Those who had ever had cause to pass through the Hampshire town of Barrelford St. Barbara often made the same remarks about its quality, that it was tranquil, quiet and still, the sort of thing one sees permanently encapsulated in an engraving on a parlour wall, when in fact the opposite was true. The piece was merely a deceptive and appealing facade which successfully masked the extraordinary events going on within the walls of the townhouses. And in November 1814, such events took place involving one of the last families anyone who knew them would suspect. By name, the Stirkwhistle family, the 3 occupiers of a moderately sized house on one of the town's 4 main roads, Kelford Road, and each of them a character with a reputation in town that preceded them. The head of the Stirkwhistle household was a man named Abel, tall and dark in his Italian heritage permitted. He had once been handsome too in his youth, but a sudden stroke in his middle age had stolen all that from him and warped his body into a formidable and fearsome mass of flesh which Barrelford had come to know and dread. He was all but entirely sunken on the one side. He did not walk or even limp, but ambled spikily as a crab would. His neck and head were permanently askew. His lips would often spasm, bearing fangs intermittently. Whether they were merely expressions of pain and frustration or curses to the god who had visited this affliction on him, no one could say. Either way, it had done as badly for Abel's mind and temper as it had his body. While politically he remained liberal, sympathetic, and even at times generous to those classes beneath those of his own aristocratic roots, he paradoxically had an unforgiving nature and was capable of great cruelty, regarding little the lives of lesser earthly creatures. For example, if a simple snail were to be slithering along the pavement, it would be the feet of some children of the town to kick it about the pavement in its shell. However, it would be the cruel foot of Abel Stirkwhistle, the steel-studded boot with the iron heel brought down with such malevolence that would crush the snail in its shell. And a brutal and sadistic socialite was he, and he relished his cruelty grandly. And while Abel could be cruel for his own amusement, the malice and the draconian evil of his youngest sister, Miss Rebecca, was on account of pure and uncompromising hatred for all humanity. Her brow was constantly furrowed, her eyes glaring hawkishly at whomever she should behold. Her lips were thin, well wrinkled, and permanently warped into a scowl, the ugly consequences of uttering such nastiness, such malevolence and spite. She was a tyrant taking the guise of a spindly, angular, bespectacled harridan, and she embodied the role as if it were her God-given duty. Her chief enemy, however, was her brother, whom she had never forgiven for being born a man, nor for being born first, and more besides. The third member of the household, who only few ever seemed to remember or recognise, was Abel's wife, Liza, a Welshwoman who had come into the family acquaintance during Abel's incapacitation, where she had served as his nurse. A meek and timid creature, Mrs. Sturquistle remained in the shadows, even in her own house, cowering in fear of the two warring siblings. Abel and Miss Rebecca between them ran the schoolhouse in Berylford, Miss Rebecca as schoolmistress and teacher, Abel as schoolkeeper. Being a town occupied primarily by farm labourers and such like, the building was only modest in size, not needing to accommodate any more than a dozen pupils. And while Miss Rebecca's formidable ire was incurred by people in general, forsaking all instances of sex or age, within her classroom there were 4 in particular who irritated her to an extent greater than all others. And they were easily identifiable by their constant lollygagging. They had been dubbed throughout Berylford with the collective sobriquet the 4 Scallywags. By name, Andrew Tresswood, Mark Waldrow, and the twin sisters Rosemary and Margaret Sargent, affectionately known merely as Rosa and Rita. Andrew and Mark were both well built, despite their lower middle class and not necessarily privileged upbringings. Both at the age of 13, they had earned already themselves broad shoulders and arms. Mark's complexion and hair were darker than Andrew's, whose skin was pale, hair was the lightest of yellows, and whose eyes gleamed beautifully like sapphires encrusted into a bejewelled cat from the pharaoh's tombs in Egypt. Despite being twins, Rosa and Rita were starkly different young women, both in terms of character and appearance. Their father was the son of Italian emigres, and both his daughters had inherited his dark eyes and hair. The Mediterranean complexion, his fiery temperament, he had only passed to Rita, however, while Rosa had taken the far fairer tones and sanguine disposition of their English mother. All 4 shared a mutual love of annoying Miss Rebecca, and while that was the case, the events of the 15th of November 1814 had gone far beyond the level of mere annoyance. The likes of leaving frogs in her desk drawer and throwing all the chalk out the window so lessons had to be discontinued were enough to boil the schoolmistress's temper and garner a caning from her brother. But when Abel had called his sister out of the classroom to deal with something administrative, Andrew had another brilliant idea to inflame Miss Rebecca's ire further than its usual degree. As soon as the schoolmistress was out of eyeshot, Andrew had stood up, not signalling to Mark, Rosa or Rita at all as he did so. His fellow pupils all watched him narrowly, either smirking with speculation over what was to come, or frowning with dread of the same. The boy's sapphire eyes darted left and right as he stood behind Miss Rebecca's desk, not moving, as though he had come to a sudden realization that he would come to regret his actions. His mouth then formed a broad grin, and a number of his classmates giggled. He looked as though he was a performer on stage about to give a recital of impressions of Miss Rebecca or her brother. But he remained silent for his audience for a couple of moments longer, before laying his hands on a book upon the desk, Miss Rebecca's dictionary. Returning to his desk, the quiet of the classroom erupted into frivolous chaos as Andrew began to tear the pages from the dictionary and flick them about the room. He threw it to Mark, who began to do the same, then to Rosa, then to Rita, and so it circulated around the room for all those who wanted to participate. The sudden din of child's laughter was not a sound often heard in the classroom, certainly not one entertained by Miss Rebecca. It must have arrested her attention, and upon her return, whereupon she beheld her classroom, half saturated with torn paper, let out an almighty screech, like a dragon returning to roost. It was in fact a call for her brother to attend her. From outside, the sunken figure of Abel Sturquistle ambled into the classroom, leaning on a bamboo cane. "Now what, woman?" was his brusque reply. Miss Rebecca walked over to her brother as he regarded the scene that had unfolded in the classroom. She pointed a slender dagger of a finger at the 4 scallywags, all of whom immediately sat round in their seats, with their eyes on the desks, hoping that if they hid well enough, they might avoid punishment, an unusual strategy to be thought up by 4 relatively intelligent 13-year-olds. Abel grumbled and limped over to Andrew's desk. He slammed the cane down upon it, only missing Andrew's head by a fraction of an inch. The boy's bright blue eyes were wide open. At this point, as he started upright, though taking care not to look Abel Sturgwhistle in the eye lest the fearsome countenance should turn him to stone or such like. "Out of your seats," he snarled. "All 4 of you, now, in my office." He continued slamming the desk with the cane to hasten the 4 children out of the classroom and out into the corridor. Away down there was a small side room which served as the schoolkeeper's office. The 4 scalawags rushed straight in, for Abel was not one to be kept waiting regardless of the circumstance. He did not follow immediately. Though it was hardly the first time they had all been lined up inside the office, the 4 scalawags had rarely taken the time to survey the surroundings. It was a small and narrow room with a high ceiling, dimly lighted with a single letterbox-shaped window. The desk and chair sat at one end, to the side of which the 4 scalawags were stood, while directly opposite an entire wall was lined with bookshelves. Only a couple of dozen volumes rested upon them, of course, old, tattered and dusty. All 4 scalawags must have been in the same trance, for they all jumped almost in unison when Abel finally entered and shut the door. He regarded them all silently with an eyebrow raised. The very sound of his ragged and laboured breaths was unsettling. Before he could take his seat, the door opened again and Miss Rebecca came in. "Now, what is it?" her brother asked her, wheeling round. "I have come to oversee the punishment," she sniped in reply. Abel growled with malcontent. "Very well," he muttered. Miss Rebecca looked daggers at him over his spectacles before closing the door again. She remained standing beside it, observing. "Now then," Abel began, addressing the 4 scalawags, "you have been in here before me scores of times too many. Why you bother leaving this office defies all belief. Seems to me it'll only be a matter of time before you return." The 4 children's heads were pointed towards the floor. "Look me in the eye when I'm speaking to you," he shouted. The 4 scalawags' heads bolted upright, and their gaze collectively met Abel's. Miss Rebecca's lip curled. Much as she despised her brother, even she would admit he knew how to intimidate, and she relished it almost as much as he did. "You come in here every time frightened after having done whatever it is you've done," Abel went on. "You leave after every beating with remorse and contrition, but it seems to make little difference after all. You do it all over again and return in exactly the same way. You either learn your lesson or you do not learn it." "They do not learn it," Miss Rebecca reiterated through her sharp teeth with a hawk-like expression that could pierce a precious stone. "Rebecca Sturgwhistle, hold your tongue," Abel commanded her. "Let there be an end to this." Miss Rebecca ignored her brother's instruction. "I expelled them today." "Will you be silent?" was his harsh rebuke, making the children before him jump once more. His sister pointed her chin at him, taking a staggered intake of breath in well-disguised fear. "You will do no such thing," Abel murmured to himself in continuation. He returned back to the 4 scalawags and smiled nastily at them. How else are they to be taught, Rebecca Sturgwhistle, that their mistakes are merely mistakes of their youth? He slammed his cane down on the table, causing a loud and intense sound upon its contact. "It is nothing a little corporal punishment cannot teach them." His voice had become little more than a malevolent whisper, and he leered at each of the 4 scalawags in their turn. At once his intonation resumed its usual volume. "Sister," he barked, "I think it would be prudent for you to leave us after all. I fear your classroom has been left unattended for long enough already. Haven't we lost enough books for one day?" Miss Rebecca remained with her chin pointed at him. She was not pleased by being dismissed by her elder, yet technically inferior brother. With her lip curling and her brow furrowed, she relented and did as she was bid, not forgetting to glare at each member of the 4 scalawags before she shut the door. And that's what I'm going to leave it. That is where I'm going to leave it. But you never know. If the blog carries on, I may let you in on how it unfolds and how Abel chooses to punish these children. But believe it or not, there is actually a point to this scene, and it does really sort of serve as a catalyst for what is to unfold in the future chapters. So thank you for joining us with that little preview, which we will hopefully I'll give you more of those in due course. Where was I going with that? Oh yeah. We've still got the art competition, which is going on. It's the 28th today, so it's the deadline is Saturday, sort of 1 minute to midnight on Saturday, and then I will go through the submissions and decide a winner. Which the nature of the prize has been laid out in quite great detail on the post on the Facebook page. So yeah, if you want to get involved in that, if you're an artist living in Bournemouth or Poole or Christchurch or surrounding, then please get involved. Be quite interested to see what you come up with there. A design for Lady Virrington, the anti-heroine of Lust and Liberty, and she features in this book as well. Obviously the focus isn't quite so much on her, but she's still quite heavily featured, so would like to see what you come up with there. So with that in mind, thank you for joining us, and that's it. Goodbye for now.